Okay, guys, this may be the last video in today's collection. I mentioned the grasshoppers earlier, and I wanted to clarify a little bit. No, the grasshoppers used to be people, and they were so in love with art and music they forgot to eat and they died. And then they're reborn as grasshoppers, and because they love music so much they play music all day. It's worth noticing that one of the things Socrates doesn't necessarily think it's bad to care about music and kind of so much, but it's worth pointing out that the grasshoppers, because they cared about music and singing, they cared about pleasure, and but they weren't thinking about. Remember, Socrates likes it when people care about big things like truth and justice and beauty, but beauty by itself, like divorced from truth and justice or whatever, if you're not thinking about all these philosophical things, if you're just enjoying yourself, Socrates thinks there's something that's not quite human about that. And that's why the creatures get turned into grasshoppers, and they're reincarnated essentially as grasshoppers because they chose the pursuit of pleasure over the pursuit of truth. Now, obviously, beauty is one of those important things that's connected to truth, but the grasshoppers only cared about musical beauty and not about a higher heavenly kind of beauty. That raises bigger philosophical questions and is involved with ideas. They didn't like the beauty of ideas. They like the beauty of music, which is good, but it kind of limits you, and the limitation is shown by the fact that they're sort of transformed into grasshoppers. It again, it's not a real story. Socrates doesn't think this is true. He doesn't actually think the grasshoppers used to be people, but it's a way of thinking about how to live your life. And if you live your life for pleasure, are you really even a person? Hamlet very famously says, sort of, what's the point of life? If to eat and feed is the only point of it, why do we have these brains with such large discourse? Hamlet says. So that's just something to think about with the grasshoppers. And again, you might want to consider that in comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. It's a complicated idea, the sort of myth of the grasshoppers. But we're done with myths now. So let's get back into the bottom of page 14 and see what we can do here. Um, so Phaedrus agrees. Let's talk. Socrates says, shall we discuss the rules of writing and speech we are proposing? Now, please notice, the rules of speech making is something that should be pretty interesting to you guys. I gave you a handout. I hope you still have it, and if you don't, email me and I'll email it to you, about how to write papers for your classes. This handout is essentially the rules. It's the rules of writing and speech. It's how to be a good writer. I gave you that handout that has all those things on it. My advice to you. So I've done this for you already, but Socrates has some thoughts about writing, and I thought we might go through those also. I'm very interested in the idea that me and Socrates are doing sort of the same thing. I'm trying to follow in his footsteps in some way by thinking about what makes good writing. Oh, the lighting's much better there. Oh, that's cool. Okay, well that's better. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't be holding it like this. Oh, well I don't know why that lighting is so much better. Okay, well I'll figure that out later. Um, so Socrates is thinking about these things. Let's take a look at Socrates' rules for writing. So Socrates says, shall we discuss the rules of writing and speech as we were proposing? Phaedrus says, very good. So, in good speaking, should not the mind of the speaker know the truth of the matter about which he is going to speak? Now, this seems the stupidest thing in the world, right? If you're going to say something, you really ought to know what you're talking about, says Socrates. Now, Phaedrus is going to say to him, well, actually, it's funny that you say that because most people who care about speech writing don't do that. Phaedrus says, and yet, Socrates, I have heard he who would be an orator, that's a speech maker, has nothing to do with true justice, but only that which is likely to be approved by the many who sit in judgment, nor with the truly good or honorable, but only with opinion about them, and that from opinion comes persuasion and not the truth. This is one of the most important parts of the entire book, is right here. Socrates says, if you were going to be a speech maker, if you were going to be a writer, you better know the truth of what you are writing about. You better be knowledgeable. And this goes back to our conversation about quoting experts, right? I don't want you quoting randos on the internet. I want to make sure that people, that's why every time you quote somebody, you got to say why we should be listening to them. You can't just be like, my friend Steve says, oh, I don't know if I trust your friend Steve. But if you say, Dr. blah, blah, blah at the Harvard Institute for blah, blah, blah studies, then I'm like, okay, that seems like an important person who knows what he's talking about. I'm going to listen to that guy. It seems obvious. It seems stupid. Of course you should know what you're talking about before you make a speech or write something down. But Phaedrus points out that's actually not how most speeches work. And Phaedrus says, he says, I've heard that he who would be an orator has nothing to do with true justice, but only with that which is likely to be approved by the many. He doesn't care about what's good or honorable, only with opinion about them, and from opinion comes persuasion, and not truth. Remember earlier in this series of videos, I was talking about how one of the points of writing is to persuade people, to get them to agree with you. The fucked up thing about that process is that all you need to do to get someone to believe you, you don't have to tell them the truth. You just got to say something that sounds convincing. Because you can get someone to believe something that isn't true. And so a lot of speech makers, they don't care about the truth. They're not, like the car salesman, a lot of salesmen don't care whether the product they're selling is good or bad. Their job is to sell it, and they'll sell anything you give them. And the speech makers are the same way. They figure, you know what? This guy has an opinion, and all I gotta do is get him to change his opinion. Change it to something true or false, doesn't matter. Get him to change it to whatever it is. You're gonna manipulate him by getting him to change his opinion. And Socrates says, and this is really the scariest part of the whole thing, is Phaedrus says, that from opinion comes persuasion and not the truth, right? The way to get people persuaded is just to change their opinions. They don't care about the truth very much. People will believe what they want to believe, whether it's true or not. And this is the centerpiece of what the rest of the book is about, is the dangerousness of just convincing people to believe shit that's not true. COVID, for example, is a virus, and you should really be listening to doctors about how to handle that virus. But a lot of people are spreading a lot of crazy conspiracy theories, and those theories are getting shared. They're not getting shared because they're true. They're getting shared because they're scared, and people feel like people are spreading misinformation because it's exciting, or because it confirms they already have an opinion. They already think somebody's out to get them, and so they share a video about this, or they're racist already, and so they share racist things. It matches their opinions, their racist opinions sometimes, and fear and whatnot. But you got to listen to the truth, which is why you got to listen to doctors and get actual medical advice. And so Socrates, this is really the crux of the whole thing, is this dangerous issue of, when you write down a speech, is it anchored in the truth? Or when you write down a speech, are you just trying to sell anybody anything, you don't care why? And these are the two forces that are sort of combating. And Socrates is very interested in, how do you connect what you are writing to the truth, to knowledge, to expert opinion? Because everybody else, when they say things, they don't really care if it's true or not. All they want to do is convince people to agree with them, whether it's true or not. And this is really the centerpiece of what's going on here. So Socrates says, the words of the wise are not to be set aside, for there is probably something in them. Therefore, the meaning of the saying is not hastily to be dismissed. We're going to talk about this some more. Very true. So Socrates says, let us put the matter thus. Suppose I persuaded you to buy a horse and go to war. Neither of us knew what a horse was like. But I knew you believed a horse to be the tame animals which has the longest ears. That's a donkey. That would be ridiculous, says Phaedrus. There is something more ridiculous coming. Suppose further that in sober earnest, meaning very seriously, having persuaded you of this, I went and composed a speech in honor of an ass, that's a donkey, who I entitled a horse, begetting a noble animal and a most useful possession, especially in war. You may get on his back and fight, and he will carry baggage or anything. How ridiculous, says Phaedrus. Ridiculous, yes, but is it not even a ridiculous friend better than a cunning enemy? Certainly. And when the orator, instead of putting an ass in place of the horse, puts good for evil, himself is ignorant of their nature, and about the city on which he imposes is ignorant, and having studied the notions of the multitude, falsely persuades them not about the shadow of an ass, that's a donkey, which he confounds with the horse, but about good which he confounds with evil. What will be the harvest of which rhetoric, that is, public speaking, will be likely to gather after the sowing of that seed? So this is, some of the language there is tricky, but it's really simple. Socrates says, listen, let's say you didn't know anything about a horse. You don't know anything about horses. What if I tricked you? And I said, look at this. Different horses, like a big, powerful, strong animal, majestic and fast. Donkeys are strong, but they're small, and you don't really want to use them in war. Donkeys are good for carrying, like, baggage, but horses are good for, you can, like, fight on a horse because they're fast. Donkeys are slow. So Socrates says, what if you don't know anything about horses, and I like a used car salesman. Try to look at this beautiful horse, but it's not a horse; it's a donkey. And I trick you into buying the thing. The problem is that if I don't know the difference between a donkey and a horse, and you don't know the difference between a donkey and a horse, then I'm going to be able to. I might sell you a donkey. And if you can't tell the difference, I'm going to be able to sell you anything. I'm going to be able to convince you of anything with my words, just with words, because you don't know what the truth really is. And then Socrates uses this as a jumping point to talk about a bigger issue, which is because that's stupid. Obviously, it's pretty easy to figure out the difference between a horse and a donkey and figure out which one you want in war. You want the horse for war. The donkey's not so good for war. You can't fight people on donkey back. It's not a thing. You need a big horse. Um, so the Socrates is concerned about the way in which people will mislead you with words when you or the person speaking doesn't know the truth. Um, and it seems stupid. It's a stupid example. It's someone trying to sell you the wrong kind of animal as a vehicle. But Socrates makes this into a bigger issue. He says the people that run the country, the politicians that are in charge, do they really know good from bad? Can they tell the difference between good and evil? Because sometimes leaders and politicians will ask you to do bad things. Um, And if you don't know good from bad and they don't know good from bad, they're going to be able to convince you of anything using their words. Just like you might get tricked into buying a donkey if you didn't know what a horse was, you may get tricked into doing evil if you don't know what evil is. And he says, and the person selling these things may do it, may screw you up. You may be able to get tricked because you have to be in possession of knowledge. So he really wants the idea is that all speaking needs to be anchored to some form of knowledge. So that is really the largest issue in this thing is how do we anchor writing and words and language to actual knowledge instead of just people's misguided, fucked up opinions? Because if words are anchored to misguided, fucked up opinions, that's how you get all of these misleading memes and stuff in COVID information that's wrong and is messing people up and misleading people and leading them astray and leading them to make bad choices because they're not knowledgeable about what's going on. We have to anchor language to knowledge. So we'll cover this next, but I think that's the end of class for today. I would love to hear you guys kind of sound off in the comments, etc. And I think that's it. Okay, guys, I'll see you next time.